Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Dr. Harry Wilson, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at Roanoke College. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for joining me again.
Happy to be here with you.
We last spoke in May, and during that time, there was a totally different presidential race. Then it was between Biden and Trump. Now it's between Harris and Trump. And according to a new Roanoke College poll, the first one taken since the vice president entered the race, she is up 3 points against Donald Trump. So what are some of your takeaways from this poll?
I think the big takeaway there, obviously, is that Harris is up by 3, which is still within the margin of error. Margin of error on this is 4.5%. So we're still within the margin of error as we were in May when we had it as a tie. So the pollster in me is supposed to say, well, those are really the same. I'm not sure they are exactly the same, but what I am sure of is that we're still really within the margin of error that we were back then and we are now. And this is not like where we were in Virginia 4 years ago, where all the polls, including ours, had Biden up double digits, and he ended up carrying the state by 10. So this is not where we are today.
What happened? Because that was just 4 years ago. And as you said, Biden won Virginia by 10 points in 2020. Now we do know it's a new race. And when we spoke in May, Biden and Trump were tied. But what happened where the Democrat now is only up 3 points, Biden won by 10?
I think what's happened there really is independence, moving from Biden to Trump. Because, what we saw in the exit poll in 2020, not surprisingly, was upwards of 90% of Democrats voted for Biden and upwards of 90% of Republicans voted for Trump. In our May poll, for Roanoke College poll, we saw the same thing. And we saw that in the poll we just released this morning, same thing. Upwards of 90% of Democrats voting for Kamala Harris, upwards of 90% of Republicans voting for Donald Trump. And because we weighted this poll to the 2020 exit poll, then those numbers are really essentially the same as what we saw 4 years ago. So the obvious answer, the difference has to be coming from those people who call themselves independent, and that they've moved from the Democrats in 2020. Some of them have moved from the Democrats in 2020 over to Republicans in 2024.
So essentially, because this poll is still within the margin of error, do you think Virginia is still in play come November?
I suspect that it is, but I would also, it would be disingenuous for me to suggest that this is now the focus of either campaign, because all the other battleground states, or what people conceive of as the battleground states in 2024, those have also all tightened. So if the Trump campaign was complacent about, say, Georgia or even Nevada or Arizona a month ago, surely they're not complacent about those states today. So if they were thinking about putting resources into Virginia a month ago, frankly, I have no insight into either campaign, but I would assume the answer for the Trump campaign is going to be, nah, we need to shore things up elsewhere where our prospects are probably even better. But that does not rule out the possibility that Trump could still win Virginia in November, because I do think that's clearly possible, and not out of the realm of possibility. If you'd asked me that 4 years ago, if I was being honest, if with a couple of months to go in a fairly steady race you're down double digits, my answer would be you probably are not going to win this state. But in 2024, it's definitely a possibility.
In the past month, voters have been able to sit with that new reality that President Biden is no longer on the top of the ticket. Does that affect voter turnout this election? How do voters feel about Biden dropping out? And do you think that this will affect people going to the polls for either candidate come November?
I think that's the important question. I think it's a really important question, insightful question right now. Is what's going on with that? And it appears that from not just from our poll, but from what we're seeing sort of nationally, that there's been a much more seamless transition from Biden to Harris then I put on my political scientist hat, taken off the pollster hat, than I would have expected to see. I would have expected a little more pushback from some circles in the Democratic Party or from some other potential candidates. But everyone fell in line very, very quickly on this. And it's really been sort of seamless. And it seems that in our poll in Virginia, that the Biden voters in May just have now transitioned to being Harris voters in August. And there seems to be not even sort of a hiccup there. Doesn't mean there can't be one in the next month. This could be, let me be clear, we were out of the field. This poll ended before the Democratic convention began. So this is where we were before the convention. I mean, it's possible. I would expect Harris, frankly, to get another point or two bump out of the convention, and after that, we'll have to see where it goes after that. But things could go to a steady state. There could be some reversion to the mean in this, and some increase for Trump. I mean, at that point, who knows? It becomes a question of when they debate, if they debate, how many times they debate, and 25 other questions, which I'm not competent to answer.
What about Trump's possible path to victory here? Do you think he could follow that Youngkin route of shaving off enough of Northern Virginia and then getting major turnout in the southern part of the state to potentially take back Virginia?
That could be possible. And since you mentioned Governor Youngkin, that's one of the really interesting things from this poll that nationally no one outside of Virginia is going to pay any attention to, and I understand that. But like everybody else, we do job approval, and favorable, unfavorable ratings, and those are remarkably steady over time. It's kind of, from the person who does the analysis, it's just kind of boring because Trump is where Trump is, Biden is where Biden is. But in this poll, for some reason, Youngkin had a little jump, both in his favorability and his job approval, both the highest that we've seen in the Roanoke College poll in his term in office, up there in the upper 50s. And I should qualify Virginia, maybe because Virginia has a one-term limit on governors. Virginia likes its governors. Whether they're Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, Virginia likes its governors. I've been doing this for more than 3 decades. Never seen a Virginia governor like underwater. We love them all. But Youngkin's doing well. So if Trump is going to take a page out of somebody's book right now, that would not be a bad page to rip out of the book.
Aside from the state really liking their governors, is there any indication of why his approval rating is seeing this bump, opposed to, you said Trump's where Trump is, Biden's where Biden is, Harris is where Harris is. Where are they compared to Youngkin?
They're way underwater. I mean, they're both around, without going to my cheat sheet here, they're both at like 35% favorable. And Harris, if I'm doing this one off the top of my head, I think was 38, 39. She was slightly better than Trump, but not significantly so, and probably within the margin of error. She was above Biden. Biden had been below even Trump, and Trump's not polled well in Virginia in 8 years. But she was sort of between the two, but it was not like there was a love fest for Kamala Harris in any of this. And to answer your question about why the bump for Youngkin, I wish I had some tremendously insightful comment to make here, but honestly, I do not. I don't know. I would say it's real because this isn't like a Republican bump. Trump didn't get one. So it's not like, oh, well, this is trending Republican. It's like, for some reason, it may revert when we do our next poll, probably next month, but it may revert back. But if right now Youngkin got that boost, and I'm not sure why, but he did.
Well, as you said, maybe Trump would want to take a page out of his book because that approval rating's so much higher. But a number that stuck out to me in this poll was that 71% of Virginians think the country is on the wrong track. As we know, Vice President Kamala Harris is part of that Biden-Harris administration. Is this going to affect her? Is that going to rub off on her in any way, do you think?
I think that's what the Democratic Convention is trying to do this weekend. I just read something this morning about former President Obama's speech and how he can try to finesse, if you will, and talk about the accomplishments of the Biden administration without making at the same time making Harris sound like she's separate from that administration, even though she's clearly part of it still. And that's a difficult task for anyone. And obviously, that's what I think the Trump campaign is trying to do right now. When the Trump campaign can manage to keep the candidate on message, that's what they're trying to do. You're supposed to smile. Here you go. You're supposed to smile at that. When they try to keep him on message. But I think that's what I think it's what they're trying to do. Whether they're able to do that is a very big question, because I think if she gets tied to Biden too closely, that's clearly a negative for her. And at the same time, it can be negative. She's walking a tightrope too, because you can't be disrespectful to the person who you've been essentially serving for 3.5 years plus. But at the same time, you have to differentiate yourself from that person. And that's not easy for anyone to do. That's a difficult task in politics or in any profession. It's just really difficult to do.
Yeah, that's definitely a tight space to be. But what are those issues that specifically matter to voters? Speaking of staying on message, and because the issues facing the country that matter most to voters nationwide are the economy, inflation, immigration, all issues that most voters think Trump is better equipped at handling. Is that the same in Virginia?
Yes. The short answer on that one is yes. The important issue, I can harken back to Bill Clinton and the Clinton campaign. It's the economy, stupid. No insult intended. But it's the economy. That dominated in May. It dominated this time. I'm trying to look at my cheat sheet here quickly to see where we had that. Of course, when I'm looking for it, I'm not finding it. 48% of voters had the economy as number one. Abortion was in there at 16%, immigration at 15%. So it's the economy. And yes, we did not specifically ask a question next time around, but we did not specifically ask who's better able to handle the economy. But you are correct in the national surveys. That's still Trump, and Trump is doing better than Harris in those national surveys on that issue. And that does seem to be the overriding issue. It's difficult for me to see how that's going to change in the next couple of months unless there is some catastrophic event that none of us want to see that would take some attention away from the economy and put it someplace else. But otherwise, yeah, I would say it's the economy all the way through. And when people start looking at that, yeah, that does. That does move in Trump's favor. And I think honestly, what goes against Trump, and again, this is speaking more nationally and not about our specific poll, but what goes against Trump is the same thing that worked against him in 2020 and worked against him in 2016, and that's Donald Trump. There's just a significant number of people who dislike him and a significant number of people who will vote against him regardless of who the other person is. In the same way, there's a significant number of people who will vote for him regardless of who the other person is. I don't have to tell you, I don't have to tell the viewers, he's a polarizing figure. He's just a polarizing figure.
That's a really interesting point that you made there, because I was talking to a pollster yesterday, and he said the sentiment of Donald Trump is Donald Trump's campaign's worst enemy. But I do now want to look at their running mates, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, as well as Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. What do Virginian voters think about them?
They were both also viewed negatively. No one was excited about that. We asked a couple of different things. We asked favorable, unfavorable. They were both underwater, unfavorable, unfavorable. Although I suspect, frankly, that a lot of voters, particularly in Virginia, probably know very little about Tim Walz, and I'm not sure how much they know about J.D. Vance. But Vance did have more of a national profile prior to a week ago, or 2 weeks ago. But they were both seen negatively. from my perspective, VP candidates really don't make much of a difference. Historically, I think most research suggests that they don't. And I don't know that they will this time around. Or maybe I say a vice presidential choice can hurt you, but I don't know that it's really going to help you, right? Harris was going to carry Minnesota anyway. Trump was going to carry Ohio anyway. They were chosen for other reasons, whatever they may be. And I don't know how much of a difference they're going to make, but I don't know that the Virginia voters are enamored of either. Now, had Trump chosen Youngkin as his running mate, it's conceivable that that could have made some difference in Virginia. But still, I go back to kind of what your person said yesterday. Trump is Trump's worst enemy. But again, my point about Trump being so polarizing that, I don't know how much it really matters with him. Sometimes I hearken back to his statement from, I don't remember what it was, that he could shoot someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue and it wouldn't hurt him. And I've added on to that, and I've said he could also take a bullet for someone in the middle of Fifth Avenue, and for the people who despise him, it wouldn't matter.
Right? To your point, I mean, he did survive an assassination attempt a month ago. Did he see any sort of bump in this poll, do you think, at all?
Maybe just a touch on the enthusiasm of Republicans. But I mean, like this much touch, like nothing, probably within the margin of error. But you are 100% correct on that, and I would have thought there might have been some sort of a bump on that. We did ask a question about how people viewed his immediate reaction to that. But we didn't explain in the question, we did not explain sort of that we were referring to his with the fist up in the air, mouthing fight. But I would assume when we talked about the immediate reaction, that's what we meant. And I mean, the question we asked was if people saw that as a sign of toughness or simply as an attempt to gain votes. Half of the people, 50%, said it was a sign of toughness. 44% of the people said it was an attempt to gain votes. That, I think, the question that gets buried in this poll, but I think that's really telling because it just says to me that for me personally, say what I'm not supposed to say here, but for me personally, I don't know that it was either one of those things. I think it was just a reaction in the moment after you've literally just been grazed in the ear. I don't know that it was either of those things, but for people to see it either in terms of essentially like a hero or the opposite of that, somebody just trying to get votes, that's, from my personal perspective, that's just people bringing their bias into interpreting that event.
And I think that is a perfect segue to a quote that you said releasing this poll. One big takeaway continues to be the chasm between the views of Democrats and Republicans. And I think that illustrates it perfectly because they can see a former president be grazed by a bullet, survive an assassination attempt, immediately stand up, and have two very different reactions as to what that was. So can you talk about what you meant there?
Sure, this is not anything new. This is not new in this poll. I recycled my analysis from 3 months ago and tried to find a slightly different way of saying it because I'm saying the same thing every time we come out with a poll because it is the same thing. And it's not because I'm stuck in a rut and don't know any other song. It's because the lyrics are essentially the same. It just doesn't change. And it is that with political polarization, the two parties are so firmly entrenched in their views and see things differently that I think Democrats right now see an economy that's booming, and they're looking at this and they're saying inflation is under control, jobs are coming back, essentially life is wonderful. And Republicans are saying something to the effect of, where have you been for the last 3 years? This isn't really kind of what we're seeing, and have you been to a grocery store lately or wherever? And everything is filtered through that lens, whether it's your Republican lens or your Democratic lens, everything seems to get filtered through that. And that's kind of how we view everything. And if anyone wants any sort of confirmation of that, I would simply tell them to, you don't even have to look at a poll, look at any news source, online source that allows comments from readers, and look at the comment section, and it's like we live in different universes in terms of how things are, how things will be if so-and-so gets elected, and all of it is just is so different. And I think as a political scientist, I may have said this 3 months ago, I mean, I lament that, because I don't know how you bring people together in that situation. It's difficult to find, and I'm not saying everyone is there, but there are a lot of people in these opposing camps, and it's really difficult to find common ground.
Maybe Virginia could be the place to start, because you have a Republican governor who has a higher approval rating than any Democrat or Republican. You have Vice President Kamala Harris up by 3 against Trump. But then you have the Senate race, which is really interesting. Incumbent Senator Tim Kaine decisively up 11 points to the Republican challenger Hung Cao. Why do you think you're seeing such a drastic ticket split there?
That's sort of, I think, an easier question, is because Tim Kaine has been in Virginia politics for several decades now at this point in time. He's well known. He's generally well liked. Whether, I think some people would argue he's probably politically to the left of Virginia, although maybe not, depends on where you perceive Virginia to be. But he's well liked, and Hung Cao is a largely unknown challenger, underfunded, unknown, and I was frankly a little surprised that margin wasn't greater than 11. Sometimes polls can even surprise me, that I get something that I didn't, that I did not anticipate, and that happens. But I thought it might be even greater than that, because Kaine has always been pretty popular too, and his favorables are not as good as Youngkin's right now, but his favorables are also pretty good, particularly in comparison, again, to the national figures, where they're simply not. So that doesn't surprise me, and I think everyone considers this Senate race to be, if not safe Democrat, certainly lean Democrat, and I would say lean heavily. And I think most of the whatever rating services, if you will, have it as a safe Democratic seat.
I know that you said it takes a lot to even surprise you, but sometimes you are surprised. Within the past month, we have seen a history book worth of unprecedented events. Based from your perspective as a pollster, has everything you've known about this election changed? Is that now out the window, or do you think the foundation still remains?
That's a great way to frame that question, by the way.
Thank you.
It really is, because you would think that with everything that's happened in the past month, you would think that everything is just simply flipped, and that this is a blank slate. We're starting from scratch on this, literally from nothing. And in fact, if you look at our poll, what you see is, within taking into account the margin of error, you see essentially the same poll that we had 3 months ago. So in that regard, nothing's changed. As we talked about, marginally, maybe it's changed a little bit, but it's not, it doesn't seem to be a whole new world. And I do think that the fundamentals, and that really is an excellent point, that the fundamentals, I think, largely are unchanged. And I'll come back to one of the main fundamentals of this is Donald Trump. And whether people like him or they don't like him, that's pretty well baked into this cake or pie or whatever it is we got in the oven right now. It's baked in, and it's firmly baked in. And if you think about it, or viewers think about it, if you know someone who's certainly you know someone who's on at least one side of Donald Trump, if you don't know people who are on both sides, what could make them change their mind about him? What would cause them to change their mind? For the Trump lovers, what would cause them to suddenly change their mind and say, no, I just can't vote for this guy, and I'm going to have to vote for Kamala Harris? And for the Trump haters, what's going to make them say, this guy really isn't so bad? I think I can vote for him. I mean, my answer to that question is nothing. That for these people in these two camps, there is nothing that's going to change their mind. Because again, I go back to something, they're interpreting everything that happens through that prism. Either the Donald Trump is wonderful prism or Donald Trump is a threat to democracy prism. Right? It's one or the other. And we did have a question on the poll about, do you think Trump is a threat to democracy? It was like 50-49, thinking he's a threat to democracy. That's polarizing.
Dr. Wilson, we will leave it there. I want to thank you so much for coming back on. And when Roanoke College releases another poll, I hope you join me and break it down.
Sure, be happy to. Hopefully we'll be in the field again in about a month.